Welcome to Weston Watches Wrestling. My name's Weston. Thank you for joining me. This is going to be part one in a three-part series where I talk about my 30 favorite rivalries from the past 3 years in New Japan Pro Wrestling. I was just thinking about what could be a fun video that I could do right now. I just wanted to do something other than just New Japan Cup previews and reviews. And I thought that this would be something that would be fun for me to make and prepare for and record, as well as something that could be interesting to watch, and also let whatever audience there is out there that might be finding their way to my videos, just giving y'all a look into my head and who my favorites are and just how I've perceived the last 3 years in New Japan. I say the last 3 years, this is going to be since Wrestle Kingdom 11, so I guess 3.5 years, but even though this first half of this year has barely been anything because of COVID, it's going to call it 3 years. It's nice and clean, sounds good. 30 in 3 years sounds great. So, but my first live New Japan show that I watched was Wrestle Kingdom 11, and I've been all in ever since then. And yeah, I originally just wanted to do a top 10 list, but as I was trying to narrow down, I realized that, not for the first time, I've realized this many times in my life, but I just don't have a whole lot of self-control. And yeah, I just feel like there really is 30 rivalries that I want to talk about that I feel like I can actually say a few things about and are worthy of making a list like this. And so, yeah, I just wanted to do 30. Felt like a good number. But in farther proof that I have no self-control, I have like 11 or 12 honorable mentions that I'm going to get out of the way up front. So before I get into the first 10 of my top 30 rivalries of the last 3 years in New Japan Pro Wrestling, here's some honorable mentions. So right off the bat, Shingo versus Ospreay, Ishimori versus Hiromu, and Shibata versus Okada are three of the greatest matches in wrestling in the past 3 years. But I just don't really feel like those matches really feel like a feud to me. They just feel like one-offs. Like, they're incredible, incredible matches, and the stories that are told within each of those matches is enough to take up an entire narrative. But I just didn't feel like they really constituted as like a feud or a rivalry to me. So I didn't want anyone to be, "Where's Okada Shibata? You're not a real New Japan fan. You're a faker. You just like Kenny Omega. You're a mark from America, and you don't really understand it." I just didn't want to hear that. So I just thought I'd get that out of the way. Those are three of my favorite wrestling matches of all time. I just don't feel like it really fit into this list. And then honorable mentions for actual things that I feel like are rivalries in my head. Zack Sabre Jr. versus Ibushi. They have great chemistry. I just don't super click with all of their matches, and I feel like it's just been overdone a little bit, so it didn't quite make my top 30. Jericho versus Tanahashi. There was only one singles match between these two, but it did build up over a long period of time, and it ended up at Wrestle Kingdom, so it feels like a program or like a storyline to me. And that one match was really great. It just didn't quite make the cut for me. Suzuki versus Jushin Thunder Liger. Suzuki was like a perfect foil for Jushin Thunder Liger leading into his retirement matches at Wrestle Kingdom, and this was just a really good final feud for him to have to really like express and show off all the different sides of his characters. And someone who like didn't like grow up watching Jushin Thunder Liger and got into his career just at the end of it, and in the last couple of years, last 3 years, I thought it was really interesting to see all the different sides of Liger come out in that feud with Suzuki, so I thought it was great, but just didn't quite make my list. Naito versus Kenta. I know that the ending to Wrestle Kingdom 14 is super controversial when Kenta came out and ruined the LIJ roll call, but it did get a lot of heat on Kenta, and it kind of feels just like an established feud that is going to be a big part of New Japan going into the future. But I just feel like the one match that they had was solid, but nothing like incredible to me, so it didn't quite make my list. Omega versus Tanahashi, they had that great match at Wrestle Kingdom 13, but overall it just felt like a bit of a disappointment to me. However, the build-up to the match was really interesting, juxtapositioning Tanahashi's old school, traditional pure wrestler style versus Kenny Omega wanting to be change the game and be progressive, and it not being a clear like good guy versus bad guy storyline, and it really kind of let the audience choose which side you were on. I thought that was really interesting. It just kind of fell flat for me, and then Omega just kind of silently leaving the company afterwards just felt a little bit weird. So it kind of leaves a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, but it was interesting. Just again, didn't quite make the list. Young Bucks versus Roppongi Vice in 2017. I think they had like 3 or 4 matches, and in the 3.5 years I've been watching New Japan, it's by far the most interesting the junior tag team division has been. And yeah, they actually had some show stealing or near show stealing matches on some really great cards. So I just remember that rivalry fondly. Sabre Jr. versus Sonata. They had a series of matches last year that were really interesting and built around like mat wrestling, and it allowed Sonata to prove himself as someone who's more than just one dimension and show off his whole skill set. So I think it was a really smart feud to start building towards Sonata moving farther up the card. Jay White versus Naito. I don't feel like their chemistry worked that great, and their characters don't really create anything too interesting for me. But I feel like I just had to mention it because Jay White was such an important stepping stone for Naito to get to the double gold. Ospreay versus Archer. Really, 2 really great matches. One in the New Japan Cup, one in the G1. I saw one of those matches live in Dallas, and it was incredible to see live. And I think that it really just helped. Even though Ospreay lost that match in the G1, both of those matches with Archer really helped establish Archer as a monster heel, even though New Japan doesn't really get to reap the benefits of that. And it helped Ospreay feel more at home in the heavyweight division. Okada Ibushi, they had a great match in the G1 and then an amazing match, that one of Wrestle Kingdom. It just doesn't feel like a fleshed out enough story to me to make this top 30. That might be the worst. Y'all might think that's the worst take of this whole thing, that it didn't make my top 30, but I think that they could go somewhere interesting with it in the future. But just for me, a lot of the times Ibushi's matches don't really do it for me as much as most, and I don't think I've enjoyed their matches as much as most people have. They've definitely been great matches. I just haven't completely fallen in love with them like some have. And yeah, it just doesn't feel like a cohesive enough story for me to really consider it like a rivalry. So I barely missed the cut, but definitely a pair of really awesome matches last year. Kenny Omega versus Jay White. This little 2-3 month long feud between them kicked off Jay White's progression towards who he is now as leader of Bullet Club, and their match at, I think it was a New Beginning show, was a ton of fun. It was just really short, and the angle at New Year's Dash was cool, but it just didn't quite make my top 30, but definitely a cool angle to know as far as just understanding the way that Jay White's character has progressed in these last couple years, and also they had a really fun match. Then, finally, my final honorable mention, Ibushi versus Ospreay. I think they had 2 matches, I believe. One of them, the Never Openweight match at Wrestle Kingdom. That wasn't this last Wrestle Kingdom, was it? I don't think it was. Was it? Man, I'm completely blanking. They had a Never Openweight match at Wrestle Kingdom 14 or 13. I think it was, okay, it was 13, right? Yes, it was 13. And then they had that fun match at New Year's Dash where they got that really gifable, memeable spot where I believe Ospreay like flipped out of a poison run off the top rope, and Ibushi's facial reaction. I could be getting that mixed up too, but yeah, definitely a cool dynamic between the two of them, just probably being the 2 most athletic guys in the company. But I just don't feel like they've really established enough history between the 2 of them for it to make my top 30. But definitely I could see that being something that could move up the ranks in the coming years. All right, so with that being said, I have some notes here. I'm going to get into my top 30. It's going to be super informal. I'm just going to kind of read off the page some notes and talk about how I feel about these feuds. So number 30 in my top 30 feuds, starting it off, Hiroshi Tanahashi versus Zack Sabre Jr. It was really tough for me to decide which match, or or not which match, which rivalry should get this number 30 spot in this list. Between all those honorable mentions, all having some kind of argument for this spot, I just feel like the thing that made me choose this match is the longevity of this feud over the past 3 years. They've wrestled 8 or 9 times. G1 27, Destruction 2017, New Japan Cup 2018 final, which is by far the best match between the two of them. New Japan Cup 2019 quarterfinal, G1 Supercard in Madison Square Garden, G1 29, Royal Quest, and Destruction 2019. And even though they've wrestled too many times, to be honest, they still manage to keep it fresh, and it still feels exciting to me, at least, when they meet up in the ring. And Sabre also just gives Tanahashi just an interesting opponent to show different sides of his in-ring abilities, and same thing goes both ways with Sabre. Tanahashi allows Sabre to show off some different sides of himself in the ring. And so I really enjoyed their matches, and that New Japan Cup final in 2018 was just incredible. Like, I think I'd probably go 4 3/4 stars on that match, but it legitimately is a 5-star caliber match. And yeah, so if you're going to check out a match from that feud, that's the match to check out. But like I said, it's just happened a lot, and the strength of this feud being its longevity and how much they've gone and managed to keep it fresh, it still has been a lot. And especially last year, I just think they went back to the well a bit too much, and it watered down the feud a bit for me. But like I said, I especially enjoy Sabre bringing out those more technical mat-based wrestling sides of Tanahashi's in-ring not character, but you know what I mean, in-ring technician. It allows Tanahashi to show different sides of himself, and yeah, I enjoy it. It just has been done a bit too much for me. But still, top 30 in the last 3 years. The last 3 years of New Japan have been incredible, so it's nothing to laugh at all. Number 29, Tomohiro Ishii versus Zack Sabre Jr. Juxtapositioning this with the number 30 spot, less can be more. These guys have only gone, I believe, 4 times, in the last 3 years, which is less than half of what Tanahashi and Sabre have gone, or exactly half. I didn't count exactly. But, and even though Tanahashi and Sabre have that one banger match in the New Japan Cup final in 2018, I just feel like this has felt more natural. There's been less of it, and I also just enjoy the dynamic between Ishii and Sabre a little bit more. When I first got into New Japan, when I first started getting into just independent wrestling in the UK, and I first started to learn about Zack Sabre Jr. and see some of his matches, I just really didn't understand him. I didn't like him at all. I thought his matches didn't make sense to me, and him working over bigger guys just didn't click in my mind, and I just never really enjoyed him. In the last year to 2 years, I've really come around on him, and now he's honestly one of my favorite wrestlers, but it was really fun for me to root for Ishii, who was one of the guys that I took to right off the bat. So every time they met, it was just a lot of fun to root for Ishii wholeheartedly against this guy that I just despised and didn't understand. Their first match in the IWGP US title tournament, many people considered Sabre a favorite to possibly win the whole thing and be the inaugural champion. So giving Ishii that chance to go over Sabre in front of the American crowd helped get Tom Ishii over to a different audience, and so I think that's just a big moment in his career. Then both of their best in-ring matches for me are both of their G1 matches from, I believe, G1 27 and G1 28. Yeah, I just enjoy the way they match up in the ring, and they also had a Wrestle Kingdom match, so that shows that creative in New Japan values the dynamic between them as well. So, yeah, I just enjoy it when every time they meet, I enjoy Sabre's submission game against Ishii's toughness, and it's always a fun thing to be on the edge of your seat wondering if Sabre's going to be able to make Ishii tap out. Number 28, I know I said in my honorable mentions that it's hard for me to consider a one-match program like a rivalry in New Japan with how epic a lot of their main feeds go. But I just really loved this, and so I'm going to go with it here at number 28. Minoru Suzuki versus Jon Moxley. I loved everything about this. I'm sorry that this is inconsistent with what I said earlier in the video, but they've only had one match, but it was one of my favorite matches the past few years. I just had such a blast watching it. It's Minoru Suzuki at his best. You could just tell he was having a blast, and I don't know. It also just felt like Jon Moxley's just like coming out party for New Japan Pro Wrestling, where he really, really got to show what he's all about. Not that he didn't in the G1, or he didn't in his matches with Juice, but it just hit this next level of character work in the feud with Suzuki. And combine that with the fact that around Wrestle Kingdom 14, there was a lot of murmurings about Suzuki potentially leaving the company. So on night 2, when Suzuki's music hit, when Kaze Ninura hit, and Suzuki came out and to challenge Moxley, and I believe they got into a brawl, it was just a really exciting moment for like every fan from both sides. Whether you're like a pure wrestler guy who doesn't ever dip their toes into the WWE stuff, or whether you're just a brand new New Japan fan, it was like these two very niche guys from both worlds coming together, and you knew their styles were just going to fit together perfectly. And when they did meet at New Beginning, it was just an incredible match and a ton of fun to watch. I just was cracking up and smiling and standing up, and that whole time watching that match for the first time. And I think I've watched it 2 or 3 times more since then. It's just a joy of a match. That's just what you want out of wrestling. It was just great fun. And I don't know if you can technically say it's like a 5-star like classic, but it was just a joy to watch. And I just hope to God that we're going to get more of this rivalry in the future. But if we don't, we got the one match, and it was a ton of fun. And that lasting image in my mind is Suzuki beaten at the end, but just smiling up, staring into nothingness. Is just one of my favorite images from wrestling ever. Yeah, I just loved everything about it, from the angle at Wrestle Kingdom to the actual match. Short and sweet. It only lasted like a month and a half or whatever, but it was perfect. I wouldn't change anything about it. Number 27, Juice Robinson versus Kenny Omega. This is the Shaka in Osaka. The rivalry that really helped establish the U.S. title. Not that Ishii and Omega's match, which we'll get to that in a later video, didn't establish the title enough. This really felt like, all right, they're not going to, which you can argue whether they've stayed consistent with this throughout the past 3 years, but they're not going to let this U.S. title fall into like a trap like the Never title sometimes does and become uninteresting. Juice was at the height of his popularity during this. He was really starting to come into his own, and he hadn't quite gotten that moment. I believe before this he had gotten his chance against Naito for the Intercontinental Championship, but this was the first time where it felt like Juice really might have a chance to take a big major title in New Japan and run with it. And so the fans were just all the way behind him, and Kenny Omega was also at the top of his game, just putting on classic match after classic match. So when Juice rolled up Kenny in the G1, it just created a lot of excitement and buzz. And I just remember that being a really fun time to be a fan of New Japan Pro Wrestling, especially like a Western fan that was just getting into it. And you kind of knew of Juice from NXT, and my first impression of New Japan, like I said, was Wrestle Kingdom 11. And I think a lot of people are probably in that same boat. It's just like this new era. And to see this guy that you kind of were familiar with from NXT against this guy that was just changing the world, it was just a fun rivalry, and you could have rooted for either guy, but I really feel like the Japanese crowd and myself were just fully behind Juice, and it was fun to watch. And that match they had at Destruction in Kobe, whatever, was an incredible match. And Kenny busting out for the first time, I think the first time ever, or at least the first time that I've seen in New Japan, the Super Avalanche, One Winged Angel. It just like said, even though Juice lost in that match also, and he fell again at getting a chance at a major title, it just really communicated to the audience that Juice isn't someone to be taken lightly, and Kenny had to break out his strongest possible move to put him away. So I really enjoyed that. Then their match the next year at G128 didn't quite reach the heights of that U.S. title match, but it definitely felt like a fitting conclusion to the rivalry. And yeah, just a nice little package, 3 matches where Juice establishes himself, but then Kenny kind of establishes himself also as just the guy that's just above him on the card with their next two matches. And yeah, just really well done stuff, really fun stuff. And that match at that Destruction show was just an incredible match. Number 26, spoiler alert, this is going to be the only tag team rivalry, in a way, I'll explain that later, on this list. Evil and Sonata versus the Young Bucks. Since I started watching this company, this is the most I've ever been invested in the tag title scene. And I just feel like that's because New Japan really doesn't focus on the tag team title scene as much as they do their singles scene, which is fine. Obviously in a perfect world, every division would be great in producing bangers, but I just think that it's kind of they choose to give their time and their energy to the singles divisions, so the tag team divisions really just kind of feel like meaningless undercard matches a lot. But these four guys were just too talented and couldn't be denied, and they served as key matches on Dominion 2018, which is considered by many to be one of the greatest wrestling cards ever. They served as a key match on that and just had an incredible tag team match. Probably the greatest, the best, the most critically acclaimed tag team match of the past 3 years in New Japan at Dominion in 2018. And then they were a big part in the promotion leading up to the show in the Cow Palace where they had their sequel. It wasn't quite as good, in my opinion, but it did help get that show a lot of momentum. And yeah, it was just a lot of fun seeing these four dudes who I enjoyed all four of what they brought a lot. Just elevate those titles even against the resources that they were given, if that makes sense. So, with that being said, and then also 2/3 of Wrestle Kingdom 13's tag match alongside GOD. So they got to have their match at Dominion, and then they got to help promote and be a big part of pushing a show in the U.S. And then also they got to conclude their rivalry in a way at Wrestle Kingdom. So, yeah, overall, my favorite tag team feud in New Japan Pro Wrestling from the past 3 years. Moving on to number 25, Tomohiro Ishii, my favorite wrestler in the world. God bless you, sir. Versus Taichi, Dangerous T. Nobody brings out Dangerous T like Ishii does. They had 3 matches last year. The New Japan Cup, Dominion, and G1. And I don't have a whole lot to say about this one. I just really hope they continue to lean on this rivalry as they try to continue to establish Taichi more and more and move him up the card as a top heel, legitimate contender in the company and on the card. And I can only hope that there will be more guys that can be the foil of the Taichi that can bring the best out of him like Ishii can, but I just had a blast in all 3 of their matches. Ishii really just kind of coaxing that dangerous side of Taichi out of him, and it was just a ton of fun. And I like Taichi a lot too, so it's kind of just like guilty pleasure wrestling matches, watching them do their thing and the dynamic that they have. Yeah, so I had to put it on my list and put it up a little bit higher just to really communicate how much I loved that feud last year, and I hope that it continues. Number 24, Juice Robinson versus Jon Moxley. This one for me isn't as much about the in-ring action, more so just what it meant for the company as a whole, I guess, in bringing Jon Moxley in and that next part of like expanding to a more global audience, which I know is kind of a controversial topic, and I get that for sure. But Moxley's a guy that I think came into New Japan and brought his Western flair and his like unique skill set, but it really feels like he respects Japanese wrestling, and he won over the fans quickly. At least that's how it seemed to me from my perspective. And this feud is the feud that just introduced him to the New Japan Pro Wrestling world, and I really enjoyed it. I think Juice served as like the perfect foil to Moxley in this scenario, where they could dip into some of their history in WWE together, where Juice was a guy that was a lower mid-card guy on NXT that was completely rejected and let go by the company and all of this stuff, versus Moxley being someone who, as Dean Ambrose, got to the top of the company. And just like the differences in their career paths there, and the fact that I believe that they brought like in a storyline that they used to be friends, but then Juice feel like Moxley got like too good for him. I don't remember exactly. I just remember it being interesting, compelling stuff that they brought up from their past. And yeah, when they finally came to blows, it was just super satisfying, and Juice had that opportunity to just show Moxley that like you might have been the guy that had the company behind you in the WWE, but we're in Japan and this is my world, and you can't just come in here and take this belt that I worked so hard for. In the end, Moxley did take the belt, but Juice gave him everything he could handle, and I just thought it was an awesome match and an awesome way to introduce Moxley. And then the story they told in the G1 where Juice was really struggling and had to scratch and claw his way back to get that victory on his final night in the G1. So they're tied at 1-1 now. And yeah, I'd love to see more between these two. But if we never do, and this is where the feud ends, I think it was awesome for what it was. Number 23, Hiroshi Tanahashi versus Jay White. Similarly to the last intro with Juice and Mox, I don't think this is as much about the in-ring chemistry between the two. Just like Juice and Mox, not that they can't go and not that their matches haven't been really great matches. But to me, Tanahashi and Jay White more so means a lot to just the landscape of New Japan Pro Wrestling as a whole. And their feud represents changing of the guard. And yeah, there just isn't a guy that is more perfect for, other than, you could argue, Okada, to just put Jay White up against as he rises up the card, and as he's rose up the card these past couple of years, than Hiroshi Tanahashi. Tanahashi being a guy that respects the mat, respect it. And Jay White being a guy that just wants to come in and only cares about his own success and the success of those around him. And doesn't care about tradition and doesn't care about respecting anything at all. And the way they brought Jay White in as the Switchblade character, as kind of like a tweener, you don't really know what he's about character. No, not a tweener. I think they did establish him as a heel, if I remember correctly. But bringing him in, and he didn't have really much of a character, and having Tanahashi beat him straightforward in their first Wrestle Kingdom match at Wrestle Kingdom 12, and then just that story of Jay White building himself up to the point where he became this guy that could just humiliate Tanahashi in their G1 match that next year, and just completely just no sell even like the pride or the fact. It just didn't seem like a big deal to him, I guess is what I'm saying. And just going from a guy that fell to Tanahashi in such a straightforward match to being a guy that could just step up to him and just shove him aside like he's nothing, and then eventually taking the IWGP Heavyweight Championship off of Tanahashi after Tanahashi won it at Wrestle Kingdom 13. I just thought that was a really interesting story, and even though none of their matches are like incredible in-ring matches to me, that storyline and that arc just means a lot to the company, and I thought it was a really smart way to establish Jay White. Moving on to Sho versus Shingo, there's just something about the chemistry between these two guys. The way that Shingo carries himself is, I described it, especially when he was a junior, as like the final boss of the junior division, and just this big monster guy. In the heavyweight, he doesn't feel like that much, but next to Sho, he feels like a monster. But Sho also has the size and like portrays himself as a strong character, both physically and with his charisma, in a way that he still feels like the underdog, and he feels like he's fighting an uphill battle against Shingo, but it feels believable. I just love that about their chemistry and the dynamic between the two of them. And yeah, Sho just establishing his obsession with needing to get a win over Shingo after falling to him in that classic in the first, I think it was the first day of Best of the Super Juniors last year. I could be wrong in that. But that just gave something for fans to latch onto a Sho, and I think it just has meant the world to Sho, and it's been so huge for him this past year in developing as a character, and you really can start to see him as a future star when you see him in the ring with Shingo. And yeah, even though COVID forced them to jump the gun in New Japan Cup and give Sho this win over Shingo to set up that never open weight title match, I still think they could take this feud in an interesting direction in the future, where Sho's obsession with Shingo is just this thorn in Shingo's side that he just can't shake. And maybe instead of the story where Sho is always fighting the uphill battle against Shingo, maybe Sho starts to have Shingo's number. I just think that could be an interesting story they could tell. And even though there isn't a ton of history established yet between these two, there is just so much there, and there's just so much that they can get out of it going forward. And they've already gotten a lot of it in their first two matches, and I just can't wait to see what they do in the future between the two of them. So the final entry for this video, number 21, Juice Robinson versus Jay White. I think this was 2018, right? The years kind of blend together for me, but yeah, Jay White was the perfect guy to finally put over Juice Robinson for a major title in New Japan Pro Wrestling. Like I said earlier, he had fallen to Naito, which I'll get to later, and then he had fallen to Omega, and Juice just was scratching and crawling to get that big singles title win, and Jay White was the perfect guy, and it felt completely unpredictable. I think that it felt plausible for Juice to win, but it didn't ever feel like a foregone conclusion at all. And especially with the story they told leading up to the match where Jay White broke Juice's hand within the storyline. And then it led to that incredible Juice promo where Juice foreshadowed the ending to the eventual match in the Cow Palace. And just to me, neither of these guys have ever felt like bigger stars than they did on that July 7th in the Cow Palace. The atmosphere was just crazy. The commentary, or not the commentary, the controversy with Josh Barnett on commentary just created this buzz and added to the atmosphere. And I still don't know if we know for sure to this day what happened with that, but yeah, overall, that match was just incredible to me. From the first bell to the end, just not many matches really hold my attention for such a long period of time like that match did. And it really is one of my favorite matches of all time. And I latched onto Juice when I first saw him in New Japan as a guy that I could really get behind alongside Ishii and alongside Naito. He was one of my favorites from the beginning. And seeing him scratch and claw up and getting this victory over this horrible, super hateable heel in Jay White was just so rewarding, and it was such an awesome moment. And yeah, I'll always remember how I felt whenever Juice rolled up Jay White for the win in that match, as corny as it sounds. Yeah, it's that butterfly feeling that you only get from, at least that if you're a pro wrestling fan like me, that you only get that very specific feeling from seeing a guy that has scratched and clawed his way finally get that big win, which only thing that could really be top that, I think, for me, is if this guy got his IWGP championship shot. That's a different video, that's a different topic. But please, New Japan, Tomohiro Ishii is the best. Give him the belt. Give him everything. Give him the world. Goodness, what are you doing? What are you doing? Anyways, I don't want to get off topic with that. That is the first 10 entries in my top 30 rivalries from New Japan Pro Wrestling in the last 3 years. Thank you for joining me. I hope that you had fun watching this. I'd love to hear what your favorite matches or rivalries are, so comment below. You can rank as many as you want. Take the time, rank your top 5, top 10, top 20, whatever you want to do. And let me know. Like the video, share the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Watch out for part 2 and part 1 coming in the upcoming days. I'll probably release part 2 before night 6 of the New Japan Cup, and then part 3 afterwards, but we'll just see how that goes. I'm excited about the last 2 parts of this little mini series, and I hope you are too. Thank you for joining me. Peace. Love y'all. Boom.